some of you in year 11 who have either, for whatever reason, not managed to complete their individual presentation yet, or maybe when you did it back in the autumn, it was rushed and you didn't put enough effort in, and it's something that you will need to revisit, that you'll need to redo. So this year it is a little bit different. The individual presentation is always quite important, but it's really important this year for a few reasons. It's going to be worth at least 25% and possibly more if you consider that one of the exams has been shortened. So the Unit 3 exam is usually 2 hours. This time it's an hour and a half. They've removed one piece of writing. So to bring the 3 units up to 100%, which are the oracy, the presentation, Unit 2 exam, Unit 3 exam, they may up the percentage that the individual presentation is worth. Okay, but at the very least it's going to be worth a quarter of your overall marks. So it is really important you do it well and you do yourself justice, you know. It could push you up to the grade that you really want. So just a few extra points and really pushing yourself on the presentation could be enough to get you from the top of the grade that you've been getting day in, day out. It could just push you and tip you over into the next grade that you'd really want and you'd be really proud of. However, if it is rushed or not prepped properly and you think you can wing it, it will pull you down. Okay? If you are, if you're underperforming, then few crucial points could well mean that you're stuck at a grade that you don't want, or even worse, it pulls you down to a grade that you really didn't expect and you thought you'd done better on based on exam feedback. So, the first thing to talk about is planning. Now, remember, this can be about virtually any topic. So let's just take rugby as an example, okay? Let's imagine that you are an expert in rugby, you know lots about it. It's an obvious thing to do your speech about. But rather than give the overall and very general title of rugby, make it more specific and phrase it as a question. So, should rugby really be taught in school? Might be something that you could answer. Or even better, is the future of rugby, is there a future? Or does rugby have a future? And you could then think about issues like the money in the game, the competition with football, and things like concussion, for example. Okay, so really important you phrase it as a question, and then what you can do is consider the W questions. So round the outside of your question, just give yourself the W questions. Okay, let's just start off with a few and see where it gets us. So who does rugby have a future? Well, you might consider professionals. So, and does rugby have a future as a professional game? Well, why wouldn't it? Injuries, concussions. You might also consider why it doesn't have a future. Well, money and finances, particularly in Wales. Where? Well, yeah, Wales and England and the European countries have quite a bit of money. But what about places like Samoa, Tonga, and other parts of the world? Fiji, which are very short of money. Is rugby going to be able to continue there without an influx of money? Well, when, I think you're probably talking about in recent times, you've got a lot higher rates of injuries or worse injuries. Okay, again, why? You might be thinking about the bulk of the players, the weights of even sort of some of the lightest players. They're huge. What is the future of rugby? Well, maybe you've got rule changes. Some people have been talking about getting rid of the idea of substitutions or tactical substitutions, where you've got fresh legs coming on against people who've already had, who are already tired, might make mistakes, might get hurt. Does rugby have a future? Well, you're going to consider the how. So rule changes and substitutions. How are you going to bring that in? Well, the RFU has got some tough decisions to make. How can we make sure that that rugby has a future in Samoa, Tonga, areas like Fiji? Well, sharing of crowd incomes and profits. Okay, and that works right across the board. So if we want to come up with a very different topic, we might want to think about school uniform. Again, phrase it as an interesting phrase it as a question. So something like, should school uniform be consigned to history? Nice sort of dramatic title. So should we get rid of school uniform? Well, who's affected? School students in the UK. And you might contrast that with the situation in the US, where school uniforms are much more unusual. School leaders have got decisions to make about school uniform. Parents are affected in terms of money. When? Find out what's the history of the school uniform. When were the first ones? Why have we had school uniforms in the past? Well, we've got a sense of identity. We've got the idea that brings more equality in financial terms. So not people aren't competing to wear their latest brands into school all the time. But why could we get rid of it? So why good and why bad? Well, you might consider lack of identity. The idea that we're all it gets rid of it, squashes personality. It's a form of oppression. Okay. Then how could school uniform be consigned to history? So, what are the alternatives? Would there need to be a national rule, or should it be down to individual schools? Okay. Then what you can do here is actually kind of decide whereabouts each of these points are going to go. So if you consider your ideas structure, you're going to be thinking, well, which one could go in my introduction? And I think here, the history of school uniforms, that could go in your I paragraph, in your intro paragraph. Then maybe for the biggest section, that might be your D paragraph here. What different people think about school uniforms. So that might be your developed point. You might include some quotes. You might include some stats about how different people feel about them. And you might include that with depending which side you're going to argue, if you're in favour of school uniform, then that might also be a develop point here. Yeah? Why? What students like about school uniform, what school leaders like about school uniform, particularly this one, perhaps what parents like about school uniform. Well, their kids generally are going to look smart, not going to look terrible. So that might also go in your developed paragraph. Then obviously in your E paragraph, you're going to argue the other side. Others might argue that school uniform prevents students and young people from developing a sense of identity. It's a way of oppressing young people. Yeah. And then actually how do we move on? How could we consign school uniform to history, or how could we improve it? That's going to be your summary. So we've got I for ideas, D, E. We're missing the A. We're missing the anecdote. So actually, your personal experience. Tell us a story. Okay. Have you been picked on for wearing earrings at school or wearing skinny jeans? Have you got a friend who's had a particularly unpleasant experience, or have you had somebody who's really struggled with non-school uniform day? Okay. And hopefully then, by asking yourself the W questions first and then deciding whereabouts they're going to go in your speech, you've got a really good framework and a good range of ideas of what you're going to talk about in your speech. Okay? Good luck.